Okay, gonna record a video here going over Sylvanas and how to take merc camps optimally and efficiently. So, uh, Sylvanas just baseline has black arrows. You can use your trait. This is most useful in the early game, and you can see the important part there is obviously the stun when you activate it, but then also at the bottom that you deal more damage to enemies with 3 stacks. So basically, if you can imagine you're fighting a single enemy, what you want to do is you want to stack this up 3 times, then you press Q, then you press W, and then you just kill the enemy like this. And then you have stacked up, you're doing the most damage the whole time or whatever, and then I accidentally attacked the other guy there. And then, you've got the bonus damage, he's stunned, so you're not going to be taking any damage, you'll get the globe at the end of the camp. So a single camp doesn't really exist, right? Is there a way I can, like, reset these dudes to respawn? Maybe I have to kill the camp. Let's do that. Yeah, that's probably what I have to do. So I'll just kill this other camp. But the main thing to take away from this is, like, this is pretty simple on low numbers of targets, but as you increase the number of targets, it gets more complicated. So it's pretty easy to envision, okay, it's simple for 1 target. For 2 targets, there's basically 2 ways you could do this. So I could attack this guy first, and then attack him a second time, and then attack him a third time, and then he would have all 3 stacks. And then for the next 3 attacks, I would attack the second guy. And so the way this works is you stun them for 3 seconds, and your attack speed is 1.67 seconds. I forget how to do the math on this, but basically you can stun permanently with just auto attacks with no like attack speed buffs or anything. You can perma-stun 4 different targets. So, I can attack like 4 different targets and I'll keep them perma-stunned. And you would do that with using Merc Queen. So this is one of the important talents. And this is your stuns deal 30% additional damage to mercenaries with 3 stacks of Banshee Curse. So this works on any neutral unit in the game, as far as I can tell, basically. If it's neutral, this will work. So the Immortals, when they're in the Immortal phase, count as neutral. When they're in the lanes, they're like an objective thing. I think the Punishers might also count as neutral, I don't remember, but definitely I think the Shrine Minions do, most bosses do, so it's not just Merc camps that this applies to. I had a friend, Porky, talk to one of the devs that this works on Immortals may or may not be a bug. They weren't really sure. He said he would look into it, I think, but so far it's not been fixed, and it's now like several months later, 2 months later or something, a couple months, and it hasn't been fixed yet in now a few patches, so I don't know. It's worked this way since before her rework and since after her rework. So it's like been over like a year or 2 years at this point that it's worked this way. So, yeah, that might get fixed eventually, and this might not apply as universally. But anyway, so or the other way that you could do this, obviously, is basically the way to imagine this is I need 6 attacks to stun each of these because I need to get them both to 3 stacks, right? So the other way to do 6 attacks is I go 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. And so I would call this a 2 count, and you just alternate back and forth. And so you can see the problem with this is, let's make them not attack me. The problem with this is that I'm not getting the bonus damage from the curse having 3 stacks applied until after the 5th attack in the sequence. Whereas if I do 3 attacks first on one unit, and then 3 attacks on the second unit, now I'm getting the bonus damage on as soon as like the first 3 attacks are done. So you're getting the bonus damage applied 2 attacks sooner. And so what that means is you can use your abilities, which is what you're waiting to use these abilities until you have the bonus damage applied. You can use them sooner. So the Shadow Dagger, I think it depends. I have to think about this for a second. You definitely want to wait for 3 stacks before you use Withering Fire. That's like pretty determined or whatever. So if I went 1, 1 and did a 2 count like this, I couldn't start firing my Q. It's going to target the training dummy, but you get my point. I wouldn't be able to fire my Q until later. So because I'm using the ability later, I'm kind of like wasting some of the cooldown on it. That it's not being fired and used to increase my damage, and so it'll just take me longer to do the camp if I'm waiting to do this. And then you would also want to wait until I had 3 stacks also on the second target before I used the Shadow Dagger, and so that way I had the bonus damage on both targets, so that when the dagger damage spreads, you can see the initial damage on this is only 39, whereas the bonus like dot damage or whatever when you spread it is 179. So like a majority, like 80% of the damage in this ability or something is on the spread. So the initial target isn't going to take a whole lot of extra damage. It more matters that you want to spread it to as many targets as possible to maximize the damage that you're going to get out of this. So the way to do like the math on this, maybe I can just do this in the description instead of trying to do it live, but basically it's like if the percentage of delay, the percentage of time you're waiting to get up to 3 stacks is longer than, or is, if that percentage is larger than the damage bonus from the Banshee's Curse damage bonus, then it's not worth using the, it's not worth waiting on using the ability until the damage buff. So I think it's worth for Shadow Dagger on 2 targets, but when you get up to 4 targets, it stops being useful to wait. I'm not sure on 3 targets. I'll have to do the math, and I'll put that in the description because I'm not doing it right now. But that's the math you have to do. Somebody can double check and do that math for me, maybe. Who knows? Anyway, so on 2 targets, pretty simple. It's fairly straightforward to understand that you want to do that on 2 targets, right? Okay, so 3 and 4 targets is where it gets kind of trickier. So the problem is, for one thing, this guy gives spell armor to his allies. He doesn't in this camp in here in try mode. I think he does in the actual game camps though. I'm not sure. I'll have to double check that. But regardless, you want to kill. Basically, the way to think of 4 targets is you're not as efficient as killing 4 targets as you are at killing 3 targets. For the same reason that you're not as efficient killing 3 targets as you are with 2 targets, right? And the same is true for 2 as for 1, basically. So, like, for example, if this is just 1 target, as soon as I have 3 stacks on the 1 target, I can use my W, if I'm going to be choosing to spend the W and using the cooldown. Whereas on 2 targets, I want to wait until the second guy has stacks. So I'm waiting on this, and, for example, if this takes me 25 seconds to do the camp, I might only be able to get effectively 1 Shadow Dagger off because I'm having to wait the first 5 seconds before I or maybe 20 seconds. I don't know what the math is, but the point is I might only be able to get 1 Shadow Dagger out during that time instead of 2. And so, but it still might be worth it because I'm getting 60% damage on 2 targets. And that might add up to more damage than just using it baseline on 1 target. It would also use more mana, to be fair, and sometimes you want to save mana, sometimes you're okay using mana. This also applies for Barbed Shot, so not everybody goes this talent, but if you do, you want to be standing closest to the first target that you're hitting. It mostly matters for bruisers that, for example, if I'm doing bruisers like this, I don't want to start attacking this guy from over here, because even if I get 3 stacks on him, I'm going to have to just waste time auto-attacking and do many more auto-attacks if I was stutter stepping all in between there in order to get Barbed Shot on him. So instead what we do is I'll just wait until his health is recharged here, is you basically just wait until you're walked all the way in here, and then you start doing this. And I fired my Q too early there, but you get the point. Is that's how to do this. So now it looks like he has the spell armor. That was weird. I guess it only does it when you're in combat with him or something? I don't know. Anyway, so if you're using, for example, I'm not sure if this armor reduction works on camps, but this isn't too important because you'll still want to wait to use it until after the Banshee's Curse damage bonus. Windrunner, it's also the same thing. I would just recommend not using Windrunner for extra Qs on camps because it's very mana expensive to use your Hunting Wave. This is your highest mana ability. You can see these other 2 are 25 and 50. So this is, you can think of this as 3 Q shots or whatever worth of mana and 1.5 daggers. But it's also a long cooldown and it's your only escape. So if you're in any possibility of like getting invaded on a camp or whatever, I'm not going to go into their fort, but if you can imagine I'm doing a fort and then suddenly these target dummies or whatever are like a Diablo and they're coming in to like fight me on the fort or whatever, I want to be able to have my E off cooldown so that I can E over a wall back into my fort and remain safe. So yeah, that's basically the gist of that, and that's why I don't recommend worrying about the Windrunner and like using your Hunting Wave on camps and stuff too much. How can I refresh like my health and stuff? I don't know how I'm able to do that. I thought toggle cooldowns would do it, but okay, anyway. So then, the other important thing to keep in mind is that there's camps that have 3 targets, and there's camps that have 4 targets, but I'm going to talk about the 4 targets one first because it makes this easier to understand. So I actually just made a picture to explain this better. Let's bring that up here. So, whoops, I didn't want to zoom in. So the first place to look over here is this like area. So you can imagine these 4 targets are the different colored circles. We'll say the red one is the like wizard minion. I think the 4 unit camp on like Braxis, for example, that has the Raven, that one doesn't give spell armor, I believe. I don't remember exactly, but regardless, it's like the easiest target to kill first. Your priority target is going to be in red, and then the other 3 don't really matter. They're all basically interchangeable for each other. So you can see, if I do a 4 count, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then after the 12th attack, all 4 mobs are stunned. So this is what this is noting. Whereas this, it takes more autos, so it takes 21 until the 4 targets are stunned. Because you do 1, 2, 3 on the first target, 4, 5, 6 on the second target, but then I need to attack every 4 autos, 1 in every 4 autos, in order to refresh the stun on the first target. So you can see after the 6th auto, I go back to the first target and do 7. And then I've only spent 1 attack away from hitting this green target, so I can spend 2 attacks in order to hit 3, before then having to go back to the 4th target again to refresh the stun on the green target. So I do 8 and 9 on blue target, this is target number 3, and then I go back and I do 10. And then I've now done 8, 9, 10 as the 3 attacks on blue and green, so I need to go back to red to refresh that again, so that's number 11. And then I go back to 12, and now blue target is stunned. So this is how this would work for 3 targets, and you can see that same thing is being displayed at the bottom here. If that's easier to look at, you ignore the purple one at all. It doesn't come into play until attack number 13. So the other way to think about this is you only need to worry about counting the first 9 or 10 attacks, basically, to do this optimally. So here I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, that's all the pattern I need to know. After I've done attack number 10, it's the exact same as this box over here. It's a 4 count. So I could just go 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, etc., etc., etc. So you just go in a 4 count like this. But you can see in this count, I go 1, 2, 3, 4. I go across each time and then back up to the top like you're reading a book. Here, you start off the same way. You go across like you're reading a book, across like you're reading a book, but then you have to go back, or you go back this way, and then back this way, and then you end up going in like reverse order from how you started. It's kind of weird. If you're trying to think of it like in a cycle, like loop pattern, like if you were imagining it as like a square like this instead, if you like swapped the blue and the purple. So you end up going, I think, in reverse rotational order. So like if you normally would go clockwise, to do it optimally, you go counterclockwise. I don't remember exactly. But anyway. So then the other thing to take into account for this is, okay, so I'm getting the 3 stacks up on 1 target sooner, but I don't get 3 stacks up on all the targets until 21 autos, whereas this gets it 12 autos this way. So the problem with this is, you would think if you're waiting to use dagger, for example, until all the targets have a stun on them for the damage bonus, that this would get you to that point faster. And it does, but it kind of doesn't at the same time. So the problem is you're also losing out on the damage bonus on the first target during that whole time, so you're not able to use your Q efficiently, so you still lose damage either way you do it, which is why this doesn't really matter. And then the other thing to consider is this target, or this pattern, because 4 targets are all stunned after 12 autos, is that, whereas this takes 21, is that that's 9 extra attacks that I have some amount of mobs attacking me, so I'm going to be taking more damage doing this. But the problem is that's not true because you're stunning the first target sooner. So this is what these little black boxes are denoting. So you can see here, because I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and now after 8 attacks, no mobs have been stunned at all. So I'm tanking all 4 mobs while I do 8 autos. So that's what this is noting here. So if I'm tanking 8 autos, if I was tanking just 1 mob, that would be 8 autos, quote-unquote, worth of damage that I've taken from the 1 mob. But I'm multiplying that by 4. So that's where this 32 number comes from, is I'm tanking 4 mobs for 8 autos. Then, for 1 auto attack, I've stunned this first mob, but I'm still going to be tanking the other 3 mobs. So I'm tanking 3 mobs for an additional auto attack, so that's where the 3 comes from, and then same for the 2 and the 1. So in total, I'm taking 38 autos of damage taken from the mobs before they are all permanently stunned. Okay? Same as over here, except you can see for the first 2 autos, I'm only going to be tanking all 4 mobs, but then after the 3rd auto, one of the mobs is stunned, so I'm only down to tanking 3 mobs. So tanking 4 mobs for 2 autos, that's 8 autos like worth of mob damage or whatever. 3 mobs for 3 autos, that's 9, 2 mobs for 6 is 12, and 1 mob for 9 is 9. And so that also equals 38. So I'm taking the exact same amount of damage taken from the mobs on both ends, like both ways of doing this. Even though this looks like I would take maybe less damage, or this looks like I would maybe take more damage, it's actually the same because of the way that like the multiplication works or whatever. So then you're also might be considering, okay, well, with this, I'm spending more autos, but I'm also attacking mobs that already have 3 stacks on them. Whereas I could be using those autos to start up getting stacks on a 3rd target. So on this pattern, for example, I'm getting the bonus damage after, like, for example, on attack number 13 here. So 13 onward, or I guess actually it's 9 onward because it applies when you hit the 3rd stack. I can go in game and show that real quick. So I'll go back over here. So you can see right now I do 106 damage, so the first 2 attacks do 107, and now you can see this 3rd attack does 165. So hopefully you can see that you essentially get the damage bonus after applying 2 stacks. Okay, back to this. So yeah, on attacks number 9 through 21 is where this equals the 21. That's why this number is 21, just because that's where it equals out. And from 21 plus, they both do the exact same amount of damage infinitely because all the mobs are all stunned, and you could hit them as many times as you want, and you're always going to have the bonus damage stacks on all of them. Anyway, so 21 minus 9 is 13, basically. That's where this number comes from. Well, you're including 9 in that, so that's why it's not 12. But anyway. And then for the weird pattern, this is what I'm calling this one, because you like start off doing it and then you start going backward in like another weird pattern thing. The weird pattern, there's the 4 count, the simple pattern, and then the weird pattern, the optimal pattern. Okay. Is that you get the bonus damage on attack number 3, 6, 7, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and then 18 through 21. And that also, if you add all those up, that also equals 13. So you actually get the same amount of bonus damage on the number of attacks doing it both ways. I'm not sure, like, if the camp, it depends on how late in the game you are and how much XP you have gotten and things like that from kills, that this technically can matter somewhat and differ somewhat, because sometimes you might kill the camp after 15 autos, for example, and then this one would have 15 minus 9, which is 6 plus 1, so you would have 7 autos worth of damage, whereas this would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you would still be actually more incentivized to do the weird pattern most of the time. And it only really equalizes once both patterns hit 21 or more auto attacks. The other thing to mention also is that most of this like only matters in the early game. So you might be saying, Rio, why are you explaining all this? It's super complicated, because what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to activate my trait, and that seems way easier, and then all the things are stunned and I don't have to worry about this, and then I can just do a 4 count and get all the attacks to be cursed with 3 stacks and everything else. And that's fine. You can do that. But here's the problem, is that if, for example, I'm on like Volskaya, or I'm on Sky Temple is another big one, Infernal Shrines can matter sometimes, Towers of Doom is another big one. Volskaya and Towers of Doom are like probably the 2 easiest examples of this. Is, for example, on Volskaya I have the turret camp. Okay, if I use my trait on the turret camp, and I am using it to stun it, I'm getting the first turret camp at 1 minute is when you should be doing it, and then you get the second one that respawns during the objective, and then if I'm using my trait again to stun the second turret camp in order to take it easier and not worry about this. It's only a 2 target camp, so it's pretty easy, but still. If I'm using that, or if I'm using it on the siege camp and then we're fighting. In fact, that's a better example. If I'm using it on the siege camp that's in the top left or whatever on Volskaya, and that's a 3 target camp, and I'm using my trait, this is a 40-second cooldown. I'm immediately after doing that camp going to be fighting on the point. And what happens in those point fights is you're going to be fighting, you want your Merc Queen to buff your turret, but they're also going to have a turret that they might use in that fight. And you want to be able to stun their turret and disable it, because it turns, basically when the turrets are up, the fight is almost a pseudo 6v6, is the way you can think of that. So your trait can turn the fight into a 6v5, and because you have Merc Queen, it's like a 6.5v5. So this is a really big way to get an advantage on the Volskaya fight. But if this is still on cooldown for another 20 seconds because you just used it on the camp, then what you have to do is either auto-attack the turret 3 times, in which case it's going to be auto-attacking and maybe that turns the difference, and maybe you can't get in range to auto-attack it unless you're unsafe, whereas if you throw just a dagger and spread it on somebody standing nearby and activate trait, that's normally pretty easy to safely disable their turret, because you don't really want to use your escape again. Remember, that's very important. Play till Sylvanas. Don't waste your escape. This is your safety tool. That's how you don't feed. Is basically you don't want to use this cooldown when you're going to want to use it for something else. Towers of Doom, another easy example, another 3-target camp there. If you use it to take your sappers in the bottom lane, the other team is going to take their sappers in the bottom lane, and then they're going to be pushing in the lane. And what happens if their sappers get close to your wall is that they explode. You don't want that. You can use your trait to stun the sappers and prevent them from exploding and give you like basically 10, but they stun it for 3 seconds, so it's basically 13 seconds of extra time to do damage to those sappers to kill them before they become unstunned. And you can just shoot a dagger and spread it, and it'll hit all 3 sappers if they're close to your wall. So you don't want to use your trait and have it be on cooldown for 20 seconds if those sappers are in the lane, because then you can't stop them from blowing up on your fort. And basically, if they explode sappers 2 or 3 or 4 times on your fort in the bottom lane, that means they're going to win the fort, and then it's going to be really hard for you to come back in the game from there if they hold control of that bottom fort that they've taken over, because they got so many more sappers in that you could have prevented if you just learned how to do camps more optimally and efficiently. Okay, so back to the picture. So that's why this optimal pattern, they're basically equivalent to the 4 count, except it's slightly superior the less attacks you're doing, and it matters in the early game because you don't want to use your trait and you want to be able to learn how to do this. The later in game you go, the faster you'll clear camps, and you're more likely to, or let me put it this way, you're less like, in early game, you're more likely to be soloing a camp. Late game, the less likely you are to be soloing a camp. The more likely it is you'll have teammates around and you'll clear the camp within 5 or 10 seconds, and it won't really matter that you need to permastun stuff because you won't take that much damage, you'll clear it so fast you do so much damage and you'll heal it up anyway because you have higher healing and stuff. Okay, so now let's talk about 3 targets. Because the benefit of this weird pattern is that you kill this first target faster, because you can see I'm doing the 4th attack to this on attack number 7, whereas this is doing the 4th attack on attack number 13. I'm also doing the 5th attack, so I'm doing 5 attacks on it at attack number 11, whereas this is still doing only 4 at number 13. So I'm doing more attacks to this I'm doing an extra attack for free in the same time it would do me to have it do 4 on this one, basically. So I'm getting 1 attack extra for free, and I'm killing this a lot faster, and then it reverts to a 4 count after that, and they become equal. But the point is, I've always gotten that extra 1 attack on this mob, so what that means is this mob is going to die first. Always. This red mob is going to be the first one you die. It's the one you're going to be hitting with your Q if you have the barb shot thing. You're going to proc it on this one. So what that means is after this target dies, you've reverted into a 3 count situation. So that's why these are the next thing to consider, and that's why I'm explaining it in this way. So the 3 count pattern, it's like the same thing. You just cut off the purple target, right? So instead of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, I count 1, 2, 3. And then I go 4, 5, 6, and then I go 7, 8, 9, and then 10, etc., etc., etc. So the same thing, you count. You're tanking 3 mobs for 6 attacks, 2 mobs for 1, blah blah blah. You take 21 autos of damage taken. You have bonus damage on 6 autos until attack number 12 because that's when these 2 equalize. So yeah. And so you have 6 autos worth of damage, but you take 21 autos of damage taken. Whereas if you do this weird pattern, and you do 1, 2, 3 on the first target, 4, 5, 6 on the second target, like it's a 2 mob pattern or whatever, and then you do 8, or then you do 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, blah blah blah, and then you cycle from there in a 3 count after attack number 9, you can see. So an additional target from 3 to 4, you only really increase the weird pattern at the start. Once you learn it for 3, you only really increase it by 1, because you don't really have the extra 4th, like, wiggle room free attack in the pattern, because you need to first build the stacks and then keep refreshing them while you're building stacks on the 3rd target. So you don't really have the gap in the pattern to start on the 4th target until really late in the pattern. So it only really takes 1 extra attack after you learn this 3 pattern. So here you're tanking 3 mobs for 2, 2 mobs for 3, 1 mob for 6, and that only equals 18 autos of damage taken. So what this means is, I'm killing this target faster, and then as soon as I kill this target, I'm going to be down to 3 targets, and then if I have been doing this weird pattern, I'm only going to be taking 18 autos of damage taken during the course of killing these, whereas this guy will have taken 21 damage. So I'm taking 3 less autos. And I'm killing the camp faster because I have more autos going out sooner on targets that are debuffed to take more damage. and from here, like, it'll revert down to a 2 target, and that's very simple, and it's the exact same thing. It's that same concept of the 2 targets of why don't I want to do 1 1 2 2 3 3 and then do it. It's the same concept of why I do 1 2 3 and then 1 2 3. It's the same concept, just extrapolated further, but I think it's easier to understand going backwards rather than building up, because it's easier to understand, I think, that this reverts down to a 3 target because that's the way that you're dealing with the camp is you start at 4 and then you work your way down, whereas you're not really starting at 2 targets and then working your way up to a 3rd target that gets added or something. It doesn't, like, doing camps doesn't really work like that. So anyway, in big conclusion, this is really complicated, and this is why I explained this, because first of all, I think I'm the only person that figured this out and did the math and actually did all these numbers, and I'm the only person that I've ever seen actually do camps optimally on Sylv, and it triggers me. Okay, so anyway, and that's why I made this picture, and I've had this picture forever, and I was like, this picture needs an actual video explanation to explain all this, because it's too complicated to figure out, and I actually had to go through and I thought I was optimally doing it one way, and then I figured out, well, actually this might matter for this, and it might matter for that, because I'm maybe taking higher damage, but maybe I'm dealing more damage. So I actually just went through this whole thought process like 2 or 3 different times over the course of playing Sylv until I figured all this out and actually settled on the correct answer. So anyway, in conclusion, the pattern is sort of identical for 4 targets, but still the weird pattern is better, and the weird pattern gets you down to 3 targets where the weird pattern is superior, better, and then you take less damage. You actually kill the camp faster doing it this way because of the way your skills work out, and then 2 targets is very simple and pretty, like, I think intuitively understandable for most people to do that one pretty optimally, but 3 and 4 targets is where I think people get confused. 3 is normally still kind of okay for most people, but 4 is where it gets a little bit tricky, and that's where I see people just give up and press the trait button. And I'm like, no, don't do that. You're going to want that cooldown. So yeah. That's all I got. Hopefully this was helpful. I don't think anybody will actually really think this is going to, like, change their game or anything. It's not like now you're going to be suddenly 20% higher win rate on Sylvanas or anything. But if you're a person like me who cares about doing things optimally, and it kind of, like, frustrates you if I know I'm doing something wrong and it could be done better, and this is just a little thing to practice in your games. You know, if you're in a losing game or whatever, your team is feeding, they're losing objectives, there's nothing you can do, they're dying, at bad times getting ganked or whatever. This is a thing that you can practice in, like, every single game you do, and you'll almost always find a way to do it better, because you'll always maybe miss a barb chop proc, or you might have spread your dagger a little bit suboptimally or whatever. Like, this is always something that you can practice, and it's tricky enough that I think you kind of need the regular practice in order to continually do it optimally. And in an actual game, when maybe it might matter, doing a camp 2 or 3 seconds faster might make the difference in a team fight, that you reach that team fight sooner, you are on that objective sooner, and that might make the difference that if your team can just stall for another 2 extra seconds or something, you might get that channel off and win the game. You might get those sappers in that takes the bottom fort and turns the whole game, and if you control it from then on or whatever. So these little 1 second, 2 second, 3 second time savers do add up over the course of the game, and they do matter sometimes. So I think you should do it. I think you should learn it. It's very simple. You can practice it in dry mode, like I demonstrated here, and just kill camps over and over and over until you get it good. And yeah, that's all I got. This video is too long already. Hope that helps people.